Hey everyone, today I'm going to be doing a long-awaited update on my Palmetto State Armory PSA GF3. It's been many months since I did my first 1,000 round review of this thing, and since then I've gotten 3,000 rounds through another American-made AK, and after doing that it was finally time to get this thing up to 2,000. So we are currently sitting at 2,000 rounds with this thing, and in this video, I'm mostly going to be focusing on the last 1,000 rounds. If you want an in-depth look at all the features and interesting facts about these rifles, definitely check out my first video. Again, this one's just mostly going to be focusing on things that happened in the last 1,000. Now, first, I want to go ahead and just right off the bat address issues that I experienced in the first 1,000 rounds, starting just kind of up here at the muzzle. If you remember in that first video, I talked about how the recoil impulse with the standard slant brake up here is extremely uncomfortable. It is not pleasant at all. So one of the first things I had to do was swap out to the Krebs Custom flash hider. For this 1,000 rounds, I was actually using a muzzle brake from Century Arms. It was their modern 74 brake. It's actually now back on my Visca to continue testing that. And I've just put the slant brake back on here for the video. But that brake did everything it was supposed to do and definitely made the recoil impulse far more pleasant than it would have been otherwise. One of the other issues that I experienced in the first 1,000 rounds, especially towards the end of that first 1,000 rounds, was issues with the trigger not resetting. I can thankfully say that that has not been an issue in this 1,000 rounds. I had no issues whatsoever with trigger reset. That was not even a thing that entered my mind. I honestly forgot about it until I rewatched my 1,000 round video in preparation for this one. But yeah, again, no issues whatsoever. The only other thing that I really mentioned in that first 1,000 rounds was one of the rivets for the scope rail over here on this side, basically sticking out too far and making contact with the optic mount, which caused some zeroing issues when running it with an optic, which just FYI, this is the Primary Arms Cyclops, the 1X Prism sight, which I'm a big fan of and I think works really well on AKs. But I once again had that issue on this one. This one usually sits on my AK-74, but I moved it over to this to continue testing with this rifle, and immediately my point of impact was off drastically because this thing was canted off so far, being pushed out in the rear. Now obviously it was within the range of adjustment to be able to get it zeroed with this thing, and we did do quite a bit of shooting with the Cyclops on here, but that rivet is definitely making itself known, and depending on what type of optic you're running, I do genuinely think that you may or may not run out of windage adjustment. Now, that being said, I don't know how widespread that issue is. However, I have had other people say the same thing with their rifles, that rear rivet for the scope rail is impinging on their scope mount and causing some zeroing issues. But once you do get it dialed in, it should be just fine, as was the case on this. Now, as far as malfunctions, there really wasn't anything that happened. Just like in the first 1,000 rounds, I did have a couple pierced primers. Now, as far as the ammo I was running, I was once again running about 500 rounds of Barnaul ammo, which was the same ammo I was experiencing that with in the first 1,000. The other 500 rounds was Red Army Standard ammunition imported by Century Arms. And again, I had 1 or 2 pierced primers in that as well. So I don't know exactly what's going on. Again, from what I can see, the firing pin doesn't look weird. It just might be sticking out a little bit too far from the bolt face, because that is not an issue that I experienced with the other AKs that I've been testing recently. So again, not anything to be too concerned about. The rifle still runs. It's just I am experiencing those pierced primers. So I guess take that for what it is. But really, other than that, this thing has been running really well. It's been 100% reliable as far as it actually going bang every time I pull the trigger until it's empty. And it's just been really a joy to shoot. As far as accuracy, it does seem to be a little bit finicky with ammo. In the first 1,000 rounds, you saw the test groupings that I had, and unfortunately, I didn't have a bunch of different types of ammo to test with it this time. And the groups I was getting with the Red Army standard ammo was right around 3.5 to 4 MOA. So not extremely good, but I do know that there are other ammos out there that this thing likes better. So I'm sure once you do isolate what ammo your gun likes, you can probably get that down to maybe 2.5, 3 MOA. But at least with the shooting I was doing, I just gotta be honest and tell you what it was. And unfortunately it was closer to 3.5, 4 MOA. But that's pretty standard for an AK. In my opinion, it's totally acceptable for an AK. And like I said, I'm pretty sure it could do better if I did some time to figure out what ammo this thing likes. But unfortunately, it wasn't the cheap stuff that I had been running through it for this 1,000. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and start going over how this thing is wearing internally. I'm just gonna go along with you, but you should be seeing pictures being rolled in front of the screen at this point. But I'm gonna go ahead and just learn along with you here. The dust cover is still tight. It's not quite as bad as that when I was talking about it after the first 1,000, but it is definitely still tight. Let's see where I'm gonna put all this stuff. I did go ahead and clean everything after that first 1,000, or after this last 1,000, just so that I can get actual good pictures of everything. So looking here, let's go ahead and start with the bolt. Wish I had a table here so I could actually set things down. But looking at the bolt, there's really nothing that's jumping out at me. There's obviously a little bit of wear on the lugs, but there's no deformation or anything like that, with the exception of the firing pin retaining pin that I mentioned in the first 1,000. It is showing the exact same deformation that Rob Skis was showing in his review of the PSA GF3. So it does seem to be more than a sample of one having this issue. Now again, as long as you keep everything installed, I don't see that being an issue. I don't see it falling out, but it is definitely something to keep your eye on. But again, you know, there's little bits of wear, but no crazy deformation. There's a little bit, and again, you'll see this in the photos, but nothing too crazy in my opinion. It's showing a little bit more than my Visca, just to be completely honest, as far as wear and slight deformation, but still, in my opinion, well within acceptable bounds. Looking at the carrier here, again, just some wear areas on all the moving surfaces. The tail of the bolt carrier is I mean, ever so slightly being deformed, but again, in my opinion, totally to be expected and within acceptable limits for me, at least at the 2,000 round mark. Gas piston looks just fine. The rivet that holds that in is still looking good, and the head of the piston looks just fine. As far as internally, I'm gonna go ahead and pop this mag out. Now looking internally, starting at the rear trunnion, it's definitely not showing the same peening that the Visca was, because it uses a full weight bolt carrier group, so I'm not having that excessive bolt velocity. So the rear of the trunnion, or the rear trunnion, looks totally fine. I'm not seeing any sort of impinging marks from the bolt carrier smacking into that, which is a good thing. Rails, again, just a little bit of shininess from the wear, nothing too crazy. As far as the right locking lug, where you see a lot of things cracking on some of the cast trunnions, again, I'm not seeing anything too crazy. There's definitely a little bit of rounding going on and a little bit of deformation. Again, more than the Visca, but I mean, It's not bad, I don't see any cracking, but it's definitely rounding off a little bit more than I would probably like to see. But again, nothing that is telling me that this thing is about to fail or anything like that. Just a little bit more rounding than I would personally like to see, but it's so far so good still as far as function goes, and everything else internally still looks fine. Rivets are still looking fine from everything I can see here. Again, with the exception of that rear rivet on the scope rail, which you can definitely tell is rubbing quite a bit on the optic mounts. As far as the finish and all that goes, or any of the pins on the front of the rifle, everything looks fine. I did get this thing really hot during the testing this time around. I did all 1,000 rounds in about 2 days, so about 500 rounds each day. So this thing got hot, and I'd pretty much let it cool down and then get it hot again. But it just kind of shook everything off pretty well. I did try not to get this thing too hot just because I don't want to try to make this thing fail, but it definitely got hot and it definitely still ran fine. Before I get this thing all the way put back together, I'm gonna go ahead and drop our no-go gauge in and see where this thing is at in regards to headspace. All right, so once again, I'm gonna go ahead and use my Climber no-go gauge. This is the same one I've used throughout all my testing with other rifles, and the same one I used after the first 1,000 with this rifle. And I'm also gonna test it in the same manner that I've tested all the other rifles, just to keep things consistent, even though I know for some people this isn't your favorite method. So what I'm gonna do is lock it on the extractor, just so the extractor is not keeping anything from going into the chamber. And all right, it's lined up. I'm gonna try pushing forward on it, and not even close. Try again, push it in, applying force, not going anywhere. Trying to push it in, and it's not even getting close to chambering. So headspace is still way good, and I would really honestly expect nothing else from this rifle. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that even though this thing has been functioning very well for me, it does still stick in the rear pretty often. That's something I would hope would have worked itself out by now. It does still close, and under normal actuation of the bolt knob, it doesn't do that, but it does consistently still lock open if you're trying to do that. Is that the end of the world? No. A lot of AKs, especially comm block AKs, are going to do that. But compared to some of the other ones that I've tried here that are being domestically produced, they're not having that same issue. Again, not the end of the world. If you're using it the way it's supposed to be used, it won't do that. But again, I can very consistently do that with this rifle. So overall thoughts about the last 1,000 rounds. This is still a really good rifle. It's got a little bit of quirks here and there, but it's been functioning exceptionally well. It's still been accurate enough for what I needed to do. And in fact, there was someone, I believe it was the second day that I was shooting this thing to get it to 2,000 rounds. There was someone at the range who was from Turkey, who at least claimed she'd never shot guns before, but she came with another person and they were having a good time. She was shooting really, really well. She came over and they were shooting at my steel target with his AR. And then I offered to let her shoot the AK-47 so that she could have that experience as well. And so she went ahead and tried it out and did really amazingly well, I thought, for someone who'd never shot before. She was using it with the primary arms Cyclops, and out of a 30-round magazine, shooting off a bench, I think she probably hit at least 25 out of 30 at 100 yards on a very low contrast target. So I would say not too shabby. Oh, thank you. And so I know that the PSA GF3 definitely helped kind of win her over to the world of AKs. So anyway, I thought that was kind of a neat experience. Out of respect for her, I did not film her doing that. So unfortunately, you'll have to take my word for it. But anyway, so I thought that was kind of cool. But again, I just ran this thing hard, got it really, really hot, and it just took everything I could throw at it. Again, no malfunctions. Again, just a couple of Pierce primers, and we are seeing a little bit more wear than on the other rifle that I've been testing recently. But again, not so much that it's any concern. Still not seeing any cracking or bulging or anything crazy like that. Just a little bit more rounding. So probably a little bit softer metals than what is being used in the Visca right now. But that being said, these are also still coming in at a very, very affordable price and are also very readily available. The other cool thing that Palmetto State Armory has started doing since my first 1,000 round video is doing a lot of pistol configurations of these, including with side folding triangle arm braces, which I think is a really cool thing. I love the look of the triangle stocks on the full-size rifles. So seeing a side folding pistol brace version of that just, I think, aesthetically really sets it off. So that's a really neat thing that they're doing. And I believe that's also carrying over to their AKV rifle, or excuse me, AKV 9mm pistol. So I'm definitely interested to see where Palmetto State's going. Again, all signs being largely good on this thing. So especially at the price it's coming in at, being a domestically produced AK, I think it's hard to ask for much more than you're getting with this thing. But again, that's kind of your judgment call to make. You saw the pictures, definitely let me know if you see anything. As Rob Ski says, if you see something, say something. But again, I'm satisfied with the performance given the cost that these things come into market at, and just the whole context of it being a domestically produced rifle in the first place. Now, one thing I believe I mentioned in that first 1,000 round video is that Palmetto State Armory is supposedly working on AK-74s, which would be awesome. However, that was supposed to happen in the summer, and obviously at this point we are well past that, so hopefully that'll still be a thing. I would love to see an affordable, domestically produced AK-74 that holds up to testing, but unfortunately we're having to wait. I would really love to see the 545 market make a resurgence, and I'm hoping that PSA can definitely lead the charge on that, but we'll see how that goes. So let me know what you think. Is the wear that you saw perfectly understandable for the round count that this thing is at now, being at 2,000 rounds? If so, let me know. If not, let me know. And please try to elaborate so that we can understand where you're coming from. If you have any experience with the Palmetto State Armory AKs, please, please, please let me know. I definitely want there to be as much information out there as possible. As I said before, this is a sample of one, but based on my experience so far, it seems to be representative of the whole, at least based on the other reviews I've seen. Again, the issues that I'm seeing in this have been carrying over to those other ones, like that firing pin retaining pin being oddly deformed. But again, just as a whole, it functioning well as a rifle. So again, but please let me know if you have any experience with it. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please go ahead and throw those in the comment section down below. I'd love to get this thing to 5,000, but I really don't foresee that being a possibility. Unfortunately, 2,000 rounds might be as much as this thing gets, simply due to funds having to be allocated in a more practical manner, since you know, there's already data out there about it, and people don't seem to want to fork out the the funds to continue pressing up the round count on this. So unfortunately, we may be leaving it here at 2,000, but who knows? We'll see what happens. But anyway, as always, with all that being said, I want to thank my patrons over on Patreon for even making a video like this possible. I did have to furnish the ammunition for the cells and rounds myself, and without them, this would have taken a lot longer. So I do appreciate that. Because of that, I post all my content over there early. I do some exclusive content over on Patreon. We do live streams, we do all kinds of stuff. We have a Discord server set up. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, or you just want to financially support my channel, definitely head over to Patreon. But anyway, with all that being said, as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.